introduce our next guest. And I apologize if you hear a dog in the background. I've already tried to shut them up with their treats, but that's not working. Our first speaker today is Dr. Cheryl Holder, who is a graduate of Princeton University and George Washington University School of Medicine. She is a National Health Service Corps scholar, internist, and HIV specialist. She has served as a medical director of one of Miami's largest community health centers and has served on NIH and CDC health advisory and programmatic review panels. I am very fond of Cheryl. I have worked with her over several years. Our paths crossed through NMA. She is my state NMA affiliate president, and she's doing a great job. She joined the faculty at Herbert Wortham College of Medicine at Florida International University, where she taught about social determinants of health, diversity, HIV prevention, and the health impact of climate change. She has served as the Associate Dean of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusivity and Community Initiatives until her very recent retirement at the end of 2022. Her leadership roles extend to several medical and climate change focused organizations. She is president of Florida State Medical Association, as I mentioned before, founder and co-chair of Florida Clinicians for Climate Action, and co-chair of Miami-Dade Heat Health Task Force. Most recently, her TED Talk, The Link Between Climate Change, Health, and Poverty, generated over 250,000 views. Without further ado, I'm going to turn the program over to Dr. Holder, who I asked if she would begin a discussion that's going to continue over several sessions about the controversy around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this is nationally a hot topic, but it is an intensely hot topic down here in Florida. And it's something that we as a community need to certainly not only be aware of, but be involved in actions that you will hear are needed to protect us and our next generation. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Dr. Holder.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure with the Black Health Trust. I watch you many Sundays, and I'll watch you on demand other times. Great topics, and I'm glad to participate in it because this gives us an opportunity for our community to learn what's happening to improve our health, and especially something like diversity, equity, inclusivity. This whole concept of DEI is new to a lot of folks. And even when we talk about things, you hear critical race theory, which President Trump banned from all the schools and from federal programs. And most people are like, what? Critical race theory? It's very new in the everyday parlance. Everybody really doesn't go around thinking about DEI and critical race theory. But DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, is an $8 billion industry at this point. And when you take it back to the civil rights era, where we started having the laws and the push of our society to understand and work with people who are now entering into communities, entering into jobs, entering into areas that have been blocked by law. And it is with this effort, with the whole push from the 1970s and understanding what's called affirmative action and other efforts that the academic world started to evaluate, is this working? Are we seeing the progress that we should expect if we were going to have all this end of racism, as people say? And it leads us and everyone know, especially in health, we've seen the tremendous health disparities. We've seen all the racial efforts of who's incarcerated, who's poor, where do people live, where do people work? And all these factors had led us to push for even more understanding and just even defining what is diversity. And you will see that the whole concept of diversity started in a concept of race, especially those who have been marginalized, but over the years have expanded to say it's diversity is all the unique qualities that a human brings. So what are these unique qualities? That's race, that's gender, ethnicity, it's where you work, it's where you live, it's how you define yourself and how society defines you. So when you get this unique individual in our society, how do we ensure that each person has the right opportunities, the right support systems, the right way of living so that person can grow and thrive? And in health, we say have the same health outcomes, have the opportunity to have the highest and the best health outcomes. So how do we get that in a diverse community? How do we do that? And that's where the concept of equity comes in, where we have to find resources and the support that's appropriate to the person's needs and appropriate to the circumstances. Then inclusion takes you to understand that if we're doing these opportunities and we're recognizing that folks are unique, how do we then make them feel comfortable and welcomed? And that they are part, besides just being hi, cordial, and I like you and kumbaya, but the actual reality is, does that person have the opportunity to participate in the decision-making? Are they part of how they're going to be, how we're going to continue our society developing? Are we going to be part of the decision? What do they say? You're part of the, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So the goal in inclusion is that everyone is at this table. So that's the tenet of DEI. And it started again more in the corporate world, in the workforce, and extended into education and into health. And the pressures that to then understand it and to evaluate it and to say, is there real value in DEI? And that's when the researchers and academicians then started looking at what framework, what conceptual framework could really take this movement and take this understanding further. And one of these frameworks, because there are other frameworks, but one of the frameworks is critical race theory. And that takes you back to the 1970s. And Derek Bell, who was one of the leaders, and this is where we get an example of what it means. In the Brown versus Department of Education, that whole landmark of desegregation, if you interpret why America made those decisions, you might say, well, America finally understood that it was wrong. It was wrong to be racist. It's not fair. Separate, unequal doesn't work. And it's the moral conviction of our society to make that change. What critical race theory then says, if that really is, how is it that we haven't seen these improvements? And so perhaps that decision was not based on the moral righting or wrong and the moral understanding and the growth of the American culture, but it was because it served the greater role of white and what white folks needed and what the majority and the people in power needed. So that took an interpretation, a very different interpretation of an action, because it all came out of law. And so when you look at it, they say racism is inherent in the US. Racism comes from part of the legal structure. And it's not going to change unless you understand that as a basic tenet of how we got here. It also says that the whole way of living, and this is where the intersectionality ideas come in, and that was Kimberly Crenshaw. And we are not just Black, we're not just a racial issue, you're not just white, but you are a series of a sum total of your identities. So you're Black, you're woman, you're poor, you're this, you're that, and all these intersect. Again, it brings in math theory and Venn diagrams, and we understand where that is. So all these identities then intersect, and that's what creates that person. So then as we look at systems and change laws, we have to look at the intersectionality of the humans that we're dealing with. And then the understanding that the idea of whiteness and the privilege that comes that drives so many of what happens. So this is what critical race theory then says. Think about and look at the framework of how we're going to get our society moving forward if we don't really dissect it and think about it. It's not about criticizing our society in the negative sense, but in looking at all the factors that leads you to improving your society. Now, this theory and diversity theory has had great impact in admissions, where we've moved towards in medical school admissions, holistic review. And it does take you to understand that the individual student that comes to you have many, many facets. And how do we look at those facets that strengthen that candidate to have that candidate be successful? And it's not just based on a score. So you can see that the power of this theory is going in pretty much many, many facets. After George Floyd, the whole concept of racism again came back. And that's when the threat of folks in power, especially when you see when President Trump talks about CRT, because what CRT really does is empower the marginalized, empower people who are defined by a race to speak up and to challenge the different ideas of how we're going to get our society improved. So it gives a way to help people to frame the information in a way that may strengthen the people who have been marginalized. And so that has led to a lot of pushback. Here in Florida, our governor has basically outlawed it. I just left in December, and right after, the week after I left, a letter went out to every university asking for every email, every course, every program, everything that dealt with racism, that dealt with race, and had any word like intersectionality, had any word with diversity. And they were all going to be reviewed and determine whether we were indoctrinating the students, because they feel that this is anti-white, anti-American, and anti-everything, and anti what America believes in. So this is the challenge we have, that if they frame a program that forces you to rethink how we see our society, and understanding that there are tremendous health disparities. We know maternal mortality, we know the incarceration, we know the death rates, and these disparities definitely comes from the impact of what racism does. And we have so much more data showing that there's no race. We know there's no race. So then the people that we call Black or the people we call white, what are the factors that then cause these disparities? And the theories behind this and the framework helps us to move this discussion a little bit further and push the scholars and the researchers to get better data to say, what are the outcomes, what works, what doesn't work. So it's a challenge, and we have to, especially as health professionals, accept the strengths and weaknesses of different arguments and see and not lose fact that the disparities are there. And racism definitely is part of this American fabric. Now, how can we get data to value the DEI work and find the best role of DEI, what works best, what doesn't work, so it doesn't just become another little marketing idea that HR throws out at other folks, rather than the real impact of improving our health outcomes. So I'll leave it there, kind of gave you the structure, definitions, and I'll take questions and then we can move forward, because it's an important part of what we're doing in medicine in getting the world and the US better. I throw out one last fact. In Miami-Dade County, 54% of the population in the last census data is foreign born. Tremendous diversity. How are we as clinicians, as we work with a population that is so diverse, if we are not trained and we are not understanding what's the best way, so we don't go down the same path of lots of healthcare disparities among a foreign-born population? So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Holder, for your very astute presentation. It sounds something like the last chapter of the Old Testament, Zechariah, where God brings the Jews and the Gentiles together so there'll be peace in the valley. That sounds like to me. Dr. Neighbor Stevens?
Well, I would like to not sound like I'm ignoring what you just eloquently said, but try to make it very concrete. So why should we care what Trump, DeSantis, or anybody else thinks about DEI? As a
Well,
community, why should we care?
Well, why we should care, I say, when I look at Florida, it has led to banning books. He's banned books like Toni Morrison's Bluest Eyes. He's banned Ibrahim Kendi's book. He's banned quite a few incredibly well-written, excellent books that challenges you and teaches the full history of what's happened, the truth. He's also this is just Florida, and this is spreading. Tennessee recently turned down a grant that would have brought HIV prevention $8 million to the community. Now, when you look at who gets HIV at this point, you're looking at another marginalized group, men who have sex with men, and also more Black men. How do you then turn down these dollars? So when you look at the actions of states that have decided that anything that deals with healthcare disparities, that deals with recognizing the unique needs of populations, because that's what diversity says. They're unique populations and they need different resources. And we should fund those different resources so we can improve the health outcomes. So every human has unique needs. Now, when you look at a poor community, especially Black women, when you look at the rates of maternal mortality, there are unique needs there that should be researched, that should be addressed, and special programs should be coming to that population. If the governors and the folks in charge says everybody is equal, there's no unique problems, we're all the same, we don't need these programs, how then do you improve the health outcomes of the certain populations? So when we look at the workforce, we know the data clearly shows that having a diverse workforce improves. This is in the corporate world. It improves decision-making, it improves their profits, the profitability of a company. In healthcare, we know we get better health outcomes. So why would we then turn away from a program that has been shown to have benefits economically and improve health? So it's a backward way of looking of using evidence and moving your society forward that would help. So we have to pay attention because we are hardworking tax-paying dollars. Why should we have our dollars be directed in areas that are not effective? Why waste your tax dollars? So if I'm paying taxes into the state of Florida and I have data showing that if I can improve maternal mortality, I improve the health of that person, I also save millions of dollars of my tax dollars, that's the way we should go. So when we say why should we not care? We are hardworking taxpayers. We should get our tax dollars used effectively and in the outcomes that improve our society.
Thank you. That was a very inclusive answer. And I hope that the message that you are giving today resonates with our listeners as we go forward, exploring what is happening and what we need to do to move things forward. Dr. Hines, did you have any questions?
Well, I just wanted to thank Dr. Holder for speaking to us today, but I also just wanted to point out, lest we think this is a Florida issue, there are about, to my understanding, roughly about 25 states that have considered legislation in these areas. So I just wanted to could you just speak to that so that we can all be sure that we're all understanding that this isn't just a regional discussion.
Right. It's not regional. It's regional in the sense that it's the same states south of the Mason-Dixon line that have always struggled with the issue of race. And I'm just speaking facts. It's not that I'm choosing any one or the other. And that's partly what this theory and DEI does. DEI says, let's speak the facts, speak the truth. And this is not a blame game. This is understanding what happened. And then how do we go together? Because what we understand is that if we improve the health outcomes of Black folks and Hispanics and everyone else, it benefits America, especially as you're looking at the shortage in workforce, you're looking at the shortage of the increase in cost of health cost. It's benefiting America if we can have a workforce that is all prepared, all healthy, and taxpayers and productive. So this is pretty much, I think at least 20 states, 8 states by 2021 had already outlawed critical race theory, even though it was never taught in the schools. But what has happened is the expansion of banned books. And even in New Jersey, they've recently banned many books. I think they banned The Bluest Eyes in a township in New Jersey. And when you think of, I often say, yes, the banning of the books is censorship, but also it's tax dollars. Why should my money only pay for white authors? Because if you look at who have been banned, most are Black and Hispanic folks that have been banned. So our tax dollars in the education system is only paying for whoever they feel and continues the destruction that happened. I take everyone back to 1919 Woodrow Wilson, when Woodrow Wilson went into the federal government and fired all the Black employees, not all, almost all. That was a huge loss of the middle class. And so the power of governments hiding behind anti-Americanism rather than dealing with the facts is spreading across America, and especially the banning of books and banning of teaching of critical race theory, which was never been done. Nobody taught it. It was discussed in schools, but the actual fact that it did have impact in how we have understood racism in a different way. If you've gone to the Black Museum, the way that it's taught, where race became an issue, because before people were not white, they were Italians or whoever they were. So the whole concept comes out of our understanding of how race has evolved in our entire world and the whole concept of anti-Blackness and the power of white. So it has been effective in helping us think, but it was not taught, and we're not indoctrinating.
Thank you very much. Dr. Walks, how are you?
He's muted.
Can you unmute Dr. Walks, Simon?
While we're waiting for that, Tony.
Okay,
Walker
no,
put some
too
excellent
late.
points in
Already unmuted, Dr. Hines. It's too late. No, go ahead, Dr. Hines. I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna say that Tony Wofford put some great comments in the chat. That's all I was gonna say.
No, and I was also going to mention that, and thank you. Dr. Holder, thank you so much for sharing what you shared. And you said a couple of times that you are speaking facts. And man, that is such a reasonable and reasoned thing to do. And it works best when you talk with reasonable people, as we all know. And we say often on the Black Health Trust that people have to get out, they have to vote, because that's the only voice the politicians listen to, the voters and the lobbyists, right? The rest of us can wave our hands and run up and down as much as we want to. I think, and what I'd like you to respond to is the challenge that I have with a lot of this is that we can talk about how it makes economic sense and how America is a capitalist society, and so money should matter. But I don't know that money ever matters as much as power. And one of the challenges with what's going on now is we can discuss it with respect to all the logical and reasoned money arguments, and then the power issue just comes in, and people would rather waste money and be in power than do something that makes sense and have any diminution in the power. We saw, you mentioned the previous president that we had, all these people who were just raving about, yay, we're on your team. He never cared about them. They just felt more powerful because he was talking to them. So I think that we have to be, and Tony Wofford just put a comment in that courage is greater than money and power. Tony Wofford, you know I respect you and I love you, but you and I are going to have that argument the next time I come to LA, because I have seen through my life that power is what people stand on. So, Dr. Holder, just talk about the intersection of the reasonable and the reasoned with this power issue.
No, you're absolutely correct. The powers and the politicians know that this is a topic that will get folks who feel that they've been left behind, or who see the progress that folks have made, who feel that they are definitely losing power, and coming behind this group will give them more power. So I still see it as an economic argument, because in getting the power behind the Trump, you do solidify your power as somebody who supports him, which means you'll get better jobs and better access and better ways. Now, why would somebody else, what would get folks motivated to go against this? And I think getting the power is important, but power without the dollars usually, I think that's what folks, the Black folks, Hispanic folks, other folks, your values, you're going to be threatened if you do not have equal opportunity to be able to support yourself and have healthcare and be alive. So power is all, to me, power and money all goes. And the politicians will say and do whatever it is that they feel is the pulse of the people. And whiteness and the power that brings you is real. Because here in South Florida, regardless of what people look like, majority of the Hispanics are white, but the census shows. Because again, they identify with the whiteness and what that power structure brings. And of course, they vote in that way. Yet the same group, we have the largest number of Affordable Care Act, Obamacare participants. So that tells me that when the dollars and the system works for them, they will go that direction. So I think in many sense, if we can point out that eliminating the concepts of that diversity brings, whatever it is, works against their money and against their power, I think we'll get somewhere. This is beyond white and Black. And I think white women who have benefited tremendously from affirmative action, they too in time will probably understand the reality, because as you get older, the issues don't play out the same way. And America, white America, the average age is around 36. The average age of Black America is around 30. Hispanics are younger. So we're looking at the average white person. I don't care what their power thing is and their concept of whiteness, they will eventually start moving towards what their survival mechanisms will be, how they'll survive as they get older. So whether we call it white, Republicans, Democrat, the parties that will maintain power will move towards what the average person says. Mm-hmm. And that's going to, I see the future evolve towards the concept that we're all unique and we all need resources that meets my needs. So when that 50-year-old woman says, I need more resources around menopause, around transportation, and they vote en masse, whether it's a Republican Party or Democrat Party, they're going to go towards that. So I don't see DEI leaving. It just may be renamed, but it's going to be, we're a very complicated society with too many needs, and we're not going back.
Yeah. Thank you again, Dr. Holder. It was great hearing you today, and we want you back. Dr. Walks?
Yes, Dr. Maxey. Dr. Holder, thank you again. Thank you for underscoring something that we have said several times on the Black Health Trust about how important it is for our voices to be heard, how important it is for us to vote. Just real quick, Dr. Johnson wondered in the chat whether it's time for Black organizations to stop holding meetings in Florida and begin to boycott, because we can make a difference when we spend our dollars differently. So thank you.
And we
Dr.
don't even
Johnson,
have
for
to
that.
call it a boycott. We're just making economic decisions that every person makes. If it's not in my best interest economically and I'm not being treated well, why should I go there? So we don't even call it boycott. I say forget about that. We need to be treated as humans. And if you're not welcoming and you're not living up into our value system, I think we should push towards values like we've always done and say they're not reflecting our values and we're not spending our money with folks who don't reflect our values. It is not a race issue. It's a human issue and it's an economic issue, and stop spending our money with people who don't value us.
Okay. Dr. Holder, thank you so much. As Dr. Maxey said, we'd love to have you back. You can counterbalance all the times that I don't speak rationally and I don't speak logically. So thank you so much for being with us today. We're going to turn, and Dr. Holder, please stay with us if you can, as long as you can. We are going to turn to our second presentation of the day, which is our own Dr. Jocelyn Hines, MD, MBA. Just a quick background on Dr. Hines so we don't take any time away from her. Dr. Hines is going to talk to us about preparing for common emergencies. Dr. Jocelyn Hines is board certified, and she's a board certified family physician. She has an MBA in healthcare management. She is chief medical officer at her company. She is past president of the Family Practice Association of the state of Maryland. She's a former chief resident. It seems like every place she goes, she's in charge of stuff. So I'm sure she'll be taking over the Black Health Trust in about 5 or 6 minutes. But Dr. Hines, we really appreciate you sharing with us this afternoon. So please go right ahead.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that. Simon, are you going to share the slides, or should I be sharing slides? How are we?
You can share them.
Okay, great. Give me 1 second to do that. But while I am bringing that up, let's see here. I can't talk and do 2 things at the same time. I'm not that gifted. All right.
Yes.
So we're going to talk about, I'm just going to do a kind of spin on some common emergencies that you might see. And comment on how this is February is National Heart Month. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. I want to change to a different view. There we go. All right, so February is National Heart Month. And in addition to being Black History Month. So just some facts as it relates to heart health in African Americans. So African Americans are 30 times more likely to die from heart disease than non-Hispanic whites. And some of the things that can put you at risk for heart disease are some of the things that we've talked about on this show many times, but just as a reminder, obesity, DM stands for diabetes, high blood pressure, hypertension, CKD is chronic kidney disease, HLD is an abbreviation for hyperlipidemia or high cholesterol. And what some of those things, what they do over time is they can lead to things that lead to clogged blood vessels in your heart, because your heart has very small blood vessels. So they're particularly sensitive to being clogged. Some of the other non-diagnosed things that can also contribute to having heart disease are things like poor sleep, untreated sleep disorders. That's part of the reason why you hear so many people talking about obstructive sleep apnea in more recent years, and why it's important to treat that. Poor diet, inadequate physical activity. Again, all things that we've talked about on this program and things that you've heard that are important to overall health in general. And unfortunately, you can have heart disease and not necessarily know it, right? Sometimes people have, when you have risk factors, your primary care provider might do some screenings to look for heart disease before you actually develop symptoms from it. But if you have some of these risk factors, you should certainly be talking to your primary care provider about, should you be screened for heart disease? The age-adjusted mortality rates or death rates for heart disease and stroke are the highest in males and females of African American descent when compared to all other race and ethnic groups in the United States. And in addition to the adverse clinical outcomes, some of the same things that Dr. Holder was talking about, those social determinants of health, the things about where you live, the quality of the air, whether or not you have green spaces, stress overall, financial differences, all of those things also contribute to the differences in disease burden and outcomes. Let's talk, so heart emergencies. So there are a lot of words that we use interchangeably. We use heart attack, cardiac arrest, MI, all of those, but they're actually different things, right? So we're just going to talk about some of those things in the context of it being, Heart Month. So a heart attack or an MI or a myocardial infarction, fancy words, right? All speak to a reduction in blood supply to a part of the heart muscle. This lack of blood flow causes damage to the heart muscle. So that's the classic heart attack that many of us have heard of before. And when I was speaking about blockages, those blockages is what leads to the reduction in blood flow. Cardiac arrest is what Damar Hamlin had recently on the football field about a month or so ago. And that is when the heart stops beating suddenly, right? The lack of blood flow that this causes can lead to unconsciousness, a lack of oxygen to the brain, which then damages other organs, which can lead to disability and or death. Luckily, in his case, he got prompt CPR, he got prompt medical attention, and at least to our knowledge, he was able to come out of that event without any clear or evident long-standing disability, and obviously certainly not death. And then unstable angina. Angina is when those blood vessels intermittently get blocked, or you're intermittently lacking blood flow and you're ending up with chest pain, right? And when the heart does not get enough blood flow or oxygen, again, due to the poor blood flow in your overall blood vessels. So because we've already said that African Americans are at increased risk for heart disease, and we've discussed some of the ways that can present itself, what are some of the things that you should be aware of or be considering when you're on the lookout for those things? So some of the symptoms look like central chest pain that doesn't go away. Often it's described, this is the classic definition of heart attack pain, right? This usually described as pressure, tightness, or squeezing of the chest. It may radiate to either your arm, your jaw, your back, your stomach. It may also be accompanied by sweating, nausea, lightheadedness, shortness of breath. People oftentimes, when they're having heart attack symptoms, they can mistake it for indigestion, right? Because sometimes it's discomfort in that same area where you might get indigestion. If you suspect that you are having a heart attack and you know you're at risk for having a heart emergency, then the best thing to do is to call 911 and stay calm. Lots of times people are tempted to go lay back down and wait it out and ignore it because they don't want it to be anything serious. And I'm not saying every time you get a chest pain, you have to call 911, but there are definitely times when you know something's wrong, right? If you're not allergic and you have aspirin around, or if you're someone who has had angina or your doctor's giving you nitroglycerin, that's a time to take it, right? And if you're with somebody who is having these kinds of symptoms, you want to stay with that person until EMS arrives. Other things that you can do, and we don't talk about this a lot, so consider taking a Heart Saver CPR training. healthcare professionals are required to take, basic life support training and things of that nature. But a lot of us are caring for or in the company of other loved ones, children in particular, the infants, the babies, who might benefit from you having the knowledge to deal with some of the common life-threatening emergencies that come up. That would be things like choking, drowning, again, some of the heart things. Choking can lead to, in kids, pulmonary issues or breathing problems are some of the most common reasons why they end up in life-threatening situations. And having the knowledge to know how to do some effective quality chest compressions or learning how to do some appropriate rescue breathing could be the difference between you being able to assist your loved one in a life or death situation and affecting their outcome in a significant way. You don't get long to not breathe, right? And to not have oxygen go into your brain before bad things happen. And we already all know that the turnaround time for 911 and EMS is different in different areas. So just something to think about if you have it. On average, these classes can be available in person or online. And the Heart Saver CPR courses are intended for non-healthcare persons, right? So they're intended for lay people. And it also can include basic first aid information as well. So just good information for everybody to have, so that then if we're going to Super Bowl parties potentially later on in the day, people get excited, right? People might get to choking on that chicken because they were talking and screaming at the same time. You want to be able to know what to do. Another thing, like you mentioned before, is if you have risk factors, keeping some aspirin around can be helpful. And we're talking about aspirin 325. Not the baby aspirin 81. If we're talking about somebody who you suspect is having a heart attack, giving aspirin early on can stop that clotting process that is oftentimes responsible for blocking arteries. Here's another thing to think about is an AED machine. One of the things that an AED machine is a device that is used to analyze the heart rhythm and deliver electric shocks to restore a normal heart rhythm. That's helpful in that in that cardiac arrest scenario that we were discussing before. There's several other scenarios where it can be helpful too, but I'm not saying everybody needs to run out and grab one, but just for informational purposes, it could cost $450 to $2,200. Lots of companies and businesses, public spaces have them around for this reason, because again, they can be truly life-saving. You can get refurbished ones. And it's just information to have, if that's something you choose to do. A lot of us bought some really expensive COVID air cleaning supplies for our home so you never know. If it's something you hadn't thought about, just letting you know that it's an option that's out there. And the directions are usually very simple. You place pads and then it walks you through what to do. And again, these are things that can be life-saving in the context of heart emergencies. Outside of heart emergencies, you just want to talk about a couple other things that are unfortunately common today, and that is opiate emergencies and opiate overdoses. Right now, you have a lot, we talk a lot about opiate overdoses, and the assumption is that this is only an issue for people who are intentionally using drugs, right? And that's simply not true. You do have people who are out looking for, buying drugs and ending up with overdoses, but you also have people who are looking for other things and buying them off market, who are buying, off market Adderall or marijuana, and for whatever reason, these things are being laced with fentanyl, right? They're being laced with opiates. So you have a lot of people ending up with overdose emergencies who had no intention of being in a space to use opiates. The other one is pills. For those of you who might have any types of pills that include opiates, your Tylenol 3s, your oxycodones, for those pains that you have, and you may have other people who, whether you like it or not, have interest in those pills, either intentionally or accidentally. There is a space for you to have the antidote or some reversing factors, Narcan, naloxone, other common names around, so that if there is an accidental overdose, you can help your family member. The common one that comes up a lot is kids, right? Kids get into mom or grandmom's pills, right? And end up with emergencies. And what an opiate overdose can look like. It can look like shallow breathing, confusion, decreased alertness, or a loss of consciousness. Even Black people can turn blue around the mouth or around the lips too, just from a lack of oxygen. And Narcan or naloxone, it is a treatment that is used to reverse the effects of a suspected opioid overdose. In most states, you can get it without any prescription required, and in some states, it is being dispensed along with any prescriptions for narcotics. It can come as nasal spray. It can come as something that you put underneath your tongue. Sometimes the EMS folks will use it either as an injection or intravenously. But unfortunately, the space for accidental opioid use, you see it in famous people. You see it in your friends and neighbors more than likely at this point. It's a very real phenomenon and something that you should consider if you having some available to you, if you know that there's someone in your house who could potentially be at risk for having an opiate overdose. And then the last thing I will bring up that is also a common thing is having asthma or COPD. African Americans are more than 40 times more likely to have asthma than our non-Hispanic counterparts. And because so many of us have asthma, oftentimes we don't take it very seriously, especially when we're talking about, and this is adults and children alike, in what is considered the mild intermittent category, which is the space where people have, rare asthma attacks. It's not a problem all the time. Those folks can also have death from asthma exacerbations. African Americans also have a higher risk of developing COPD and lung cancer, even among non-smokers. And African Americans, unfortunately, are 3 times more likely to die from asthma-related causes than their non-Hispanic whites. So one of the things, again, if you've got folks in your home, so for example, I have a niece who's with me on a regular basis. She has asthma. I keep an albuterol inhaler around. Because if you have an emergency, that's not the time to go wondering what to do about that. For kids at school, when they have asthma, they have to keep an albuterol inhaler at school. So if you have somebody or you are someone who has asthma or COPD, even if it doesn't bother you that often, you want to keep your emergency rescue inhaler, that's why it's called that, available and accessible to you, because you never know when an emergency is going to come up. And if you have someone that frequents your home that has asthma or COPD, you might want to keep one at your house just in case they need it. There are other things that come up, but I just wanted to hit those highlights for us today. I am going to stop sharing.
Dr. Hines, I really appreciate that astute presentation. I want to ask you a question, however. Since this is Super Bowl Sunday, if a relative all of a sudden passes out, and before we've gone for this training, what should the average person do?
Passes out in theory for what reason? So the first one is ABCs, right? So we're talking about, if you've got somebody who's who appears to have lost consciousness, the classic things are, assuming that you're in a space that is safe for you, the classic things is to walk over to them, shake them, hey, are you okay, right? Make sure that we're not playing games. People do, goofy things, right? And then if they're not responsive to you, then I would holler out. Somebody call 911 while someone else is calling 911. You're checking to see if they're breathing, right? And that's just going to be, you're going to put an ear to right in front of their mouth area while you're looking at their chest and see if anything is moving. The next one is you're going to check for a pulse, right? You're going to check either on their wrist, you're going to check their neck and see what's going on. Because by this point, if the person who's got 911 on the phone, the 911 operator needs to know, what's the scenario? And you can be able to say, hey, I've got, I just met this guy, right? He's here at the house. He passed out. while we were watching the game. He doesn't seem to be breathing and he doesn't have a pulse. Those are the things that EMS needs to know. If you think it was because of choking or something like that, that's somebody to, again, pass out, you can do the chest compressions, or you could do some basic chest compressions, because that's the thing that is going to lead to breathing. And chest compressions are literally just what you think they are. Most states have Good Samaritan laws. So even if you are not 100% trained, but you're doing something in good faith, you are usually protected. And then after that, you can only do what rescue breathing, more than compressions. Rescue breathing, is a place to start as well, if you feel comfortable. There are also little kits that people can get on their keychains, right? That can have little mouth guards that you can keep around. I keep one in my car, a first aid kit in my car that has a little mouthpiece on there, because again, reasonably, you don't necessarily want to put your mouth in everybody's mouth, understandably. But those are some simple things. If you're talking about choking in particular, if that's what we were kind of alluding to before someone's passed out, but they're clearly choking, you always have that. If you have a high back chair, you can always lean over. And let's say you're by yourself, right? Enjoying your Super Bowl because you wanted to watch the game and you didn't want all that talking, right? So you stayed at home alone. You can use a high back chair to kind of push kind of in that rib cage area, and then hopefully dislodge it. The Heimlich maneuver, again, even if you don't know exactly what you're doing and you're trying to assist somebody with the Heimlich maneuver, it is essentially you're bear hugging as best you can around them and using your, clasping your fingers thumb over thumb to kind of get up and under, to do up and under underneath that rib cage, because you're trying to make them vomit. So you're gonna give it all you got. Those are some basic things you can do, but really 911, right? If someone's unconscious on your floor, most of us don't have what it's going to take to revive them. 911 as soon as you possibly can.
That's excellent. I'm wondering if on one of our programs, we can get a small film or a way to demonstrate some of what you talked about. And it might even be good for some people to consider having a brief training when they have family reunions, because we have so much that happens among our families. I know we're getting close to the Super Bowl time, so let's ask for final comments. Are there any questions, Dr. Walks, that are in the chat for Dr. Hines?
Let's see.
I don't
One
see.
of the questions in the chat was the question about whether aspirin tablets, the non-enteric coated ones, when you're going to give someone that aspirin because you feel that there's some heart issue going on, should the aspirin be chewed or should the aspirin be swallowed?
It's not a requirement. The aspirin needs to get in, right? The aspirin needs to get into the belly, and the stomach acids will do the rest.
So those of us who have chewed an aspirin know that they taste terrible.
Awful.
So if the person can swallow the aspirin, they will like you a lot more afterward.
They'll wake up with that if you chew it, though.
That's true. That's true. That's the only question in there. Well, hold on. There's another one. Could the same nasal spray be used for adults and children? I think the question is about the albuterol inhaler, Dr. Hines.
Or I think it's about
Narcan.
I thought about to say, I think it's
Was it
about
Narcan?
Narcan. So here's the thing about
thank you.
Narcan. If you're wrong and they don't have, and the issue is not an opioid issue, it doesn't do the person any harm, right? So Narcan used in a situation that ultimately turns out to not be an opioid issue, it doesn't do anything, because the receptors that it works on, it doesn't do anything. So you are better off if that's in your possibility wheelhouse. Give it a shot.
So it's good to have Narcan around and an EpiPen around at family gatherings, just in
So
case.
EpiPens, I specifically didn't go into EpiPens in this talk because of the shortage of EpiPens, right? So if you are someone who needs an EpiPen, then carry it with you. Make sure it's not expired. Make sure you have the things that you need to be able to use it, right? Because if you're allergic to bees and you didn't take it with you when you went out to the summer cookout where the bees are, it's not going to help you if you get stung by a bee. Here's the other thing. If you know you have severe food allergies, you can't always be sure that everybody knows the ingredients of the things that they cooked with or cooked around or all of those things. So again, that's one of those things. You take this stuff with you. It doesn't do you any good if it's at home and you're not.
Well, I thank you so much for your excellent presentation, and you'll be back with us all the time. It's good to have a young, sharp physician. And I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Hines a few months ago, and I was so excited. I told Dr. Waltz I want to move her to California. Anyway, I want us to all be able to get to see a Black quarterback win the Super Bowl today. Let's have final words, Dr. Hines.
As always, it was a great discussion. I appreciated, Dr. Holder bringing the importance of teaching around the fundamentals of race at all levels, right? And the importance that it plays. And what I think we're also going to have to be on the lookout for is what I also think there's a pushback is race being a part of policy decisions, right? So as race becomes a potential part of policy decisions across the board, in the same way health is supposed to be a part of policy decisions across the board, I think that's a large part of the fear and the angst. And we are situated to be on top of or organizing, for example, as Dr. Johnson pointed out earlier, what are we going to do about that?
Thank you so much, Dr. Hines. Dr. Walks.
Thank you, Dr. Maxey. I also really appreciate first Dr. Holder's approach, very, very reasoned approach. It's always easier for folks, even if they want to be on your side, to understand things when they're presented well with the great scholarship. And so I really appreciate Dr. Holder being with us and helping us with a way of approaching this. I really like if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And I also, one of the things that I like to remember is, in God we trust, all others bring data. And so Dr. Holder's presentation giving us a lot of data to help us with our argument and to help us with the things that we are going to continue to push, that matters a lot. With respect to the presentation Dr. Hines gave, I think that the part that I want to take away from that is the available training. All of us can learn more about how to help people when they are in an emergency. And what Dr. Hines shared with us are ways to recognize an emergency. She didn't try to turn everybody into a nurse or a PA or a nurse practitioner or a physician, but she tried to make sure we know that there are ways to get more information and get better trained so you yourself are a better resource. What I'd like Dr. Hines to come back with is to tell us all the other stuff she's got in her car. She had the little thing to protect your mouth. She's got a first aid kit there. I want to have in my car what Dr. Hines has in her car, so I will be as prepared as she is. And so I think in all seriousness, we can put a list of the things that folks should have available to them in their home, a home first aid kit, and a home and a car first aid kit, so that folks at least know what's there. And Dr. Gibson put in the chat, though aspirin tastes awful, it would be best to choose a tablet. So our resident expert pharmacist, Dr. Gibson, said, even if they hate you, chew the aspirin. So there you go. Thank you, Dr. Maxey.
Okay, Dr. Neighbor-Stevens.
Well, I am very happy that we've had the talks that we've had and the discussion that we've had today. The issue around DEI is something that clearly I keep bringing it up. I feel that it is something that we really need to engage in and be prepared to, I don't want to say go to war, but this is a battle for us, and we can't expect anybody else to do the battle for us. We can ask for help and allies, but the responsibility is on us. And
Amen.
I'm not seeing the response that I think needs to be welled up because I do think we're in a very serious situation. The incident with the cardiac arrest during the football game, I think scared a lot of people, but it also made me think about how many times we can find ourselves in situations where somebody needs help and people don't know what to do. So that was why I asked Dr. Hines to put this presentation together to, again, start people thinking about their plan. I'll go back to Dr. Steiner. We need to have our plans. It's not complicated, but you do need to take a little time in preparation, in anticipation of problem situations. Thank you all for coming this afternoon.
And thank everybody. This reminds me a bit that Frederick Douglass years ago said, power concedes, but power demands. And I'm sure that's where we need to go with DEI. I thank Dr. Holder and Dr. Hines for their presentations today. Next week, we're going to have a presentation from Dr. Brian Stone, who's a noted urologist. There's been a spike in men having problems with prostate cancer. And I had a case referred to me just the other day of someone who went in the hospital with prostate cancer and came out with end-stage renal failure requiring dialysis. So next week, Dr. Brian Stone. And who do we have after that, Dr. Neighbor Stevens?
Dr. Tony Brown in the AI presentation.
Okay. Well, thank everybody. Hope a Black quarterback wins today. Have a good day.
Bye.